So Rawls is actually a fairly recent scholar, maybe 50s, 60s, I think, when he was writing. I think he wrote something called A Theory of Justice, I believe it was. And so he's a very influential, well worth knowing about. People will throw his name around, to this day. He's an important figure. And the perspective he comes from is something called social contract theory. It goes back to you have to ground an ethic in something. You have to ground an ethic, and so what way of doing that is best? And how do you do that? What way of doing that? Well, the ancients had their way, which is basically ethics comes from creating good people who are basically better people, will make better decisions. So ethics is really a matter of becoming the best person you can, and then engaging in each situation and making a good judgment. That's the ancient, virtue ethics. The modern ethics are a little bit different. Modern ethics are going to be more like there's a procedure involved. If you follow this procedure, then you'll be ethical. It doesn't matter whether you're ethical or not. It's just that the procedure itself makes the outcome ethical as opposed to unethical. So the definition of ethical becomes following a procedure. Now, where does this come from? Have you heard of Hobbes and Locke? This is very fundamental names. You should really know them before you graduate. Hobbes and Locke? No? Hobbes. There's a comic, something in Hobbes. That little kid. Calvin and Hobbes, yeah. And who's Calvin? Calvin's actually the Protestants. And then Hobbes, he's a philosopher at the same time who's actually right. So it's actually, the comic is actually alluding to this. So in any case, Hobbes is writing during the English Civil War. Okay, they had a Civil War. Civil War is very pleasant things. Are they fun? Yes. Imagine a Civil War. You're walking around your neighborhood and somebody could be trying to kill you. You can't even go home without looking over your shoulder. And basically, if a bunch of people get together, they can break into your house, take you away, burn it, do whatever the hell they want. Sound like a good time? No. Would you be willing, under those circumstances, would you be willing to basically say, I'm going to, vote for a strong mayor who is going to enforce things like a curfew starting at, as soon as it's dark, there's a curfew. No one has a right to get out. If you leave your house, you're done. No one has a right to, let's say, have tinted windows in their car. And everyone, if a policeman asks you to, you have to show identification. And if you suspect something, he should be able to frisk you. So you're giving up a lot of your freedoms. Is that worth it? Do you want to, maybe you don't want to give up your freedoms, but isn't that a good deal? In other words, you're going to have a mayor who's going to protect you, make sure you're not killed. You don't have to look over your shoulder and worry for you and your cat and your kids, your spouse, right, and your friends. You don't have to worry anymore. The only thing you have to do is give up some of your freedoms, no? You don't care? Civil war or freedom, or giving up freedoms. Freedom, but a war of all against all, or give up some of your freedom to the Leviathan, which is the king. Make sense?
It's better in theory.
What's that?
It's one of those things that's definitely better in theory.
It's better in theory, but I have a master's in political science, and if you go through political theory, the sequence makes a tremendous amount of sense. So the moderns start with Hobbes, basically a government contract between the government or between the contract between the people and the government. The people give up their freedom for security. Then you go to Locke, the people give up their freedom not only for security for their body and health and safety, but also for their property. So now the government can't take their property, their neighbors can't take their property, so you're expanding the contract from physical safety, which is Hobbes, and later on Locke in the 1700s, protection of property. Now we talked about free markets. Why is protection of property important for free markets?
Your assets are essential to your function.
Well, suppose, basically a property wasn't secure. People could take your property, the government could take your property. How would that undermine a free market?
It would inhibit like innovation, wouldn't it? Because you wouldn't want your invention to get
As
stolen.
soon as you get some money or get some stuff, someone's angling to take it. And it could be the government's going to take it. So why do it? Why work? Why innovate? Why exchange? You're going to get ripped off. Everything grinds to a halt. Unless you have protections for property, you're done. That's a foundation for the free market or any other economic system. Okay, so the idea is that we are naturally people, and actually the research into I forget what they call it. It's like what's like prehistoric societies. What is that called? It's not Paleolithic. It's Aboriginal societies, prehistorical societies where we're running around in tribes. The evidence is they were constantly at war with each other. They were constantly attacking, enslaving, just slaughtering each other, left and right. So we are not, and so the modern research kind of bears out the assumption here that people are not very pleasant. They're capable of a lot of evil, and we need protection, from them. Now, what does that sound like in terms of the debate between Socrates and Thrasymachus and Glaucon? What does Glaucon says? Glaucon says we need to get together as the weak to do what?
To do more things, to get more power so that we can succeed.
Okay, to get more power against who? Who are we afraid of?
The other people.
The strong.
Yeah.
The ones that are naturally, going in a position to dominate us and enslave us and make us do whatever they want. We don't like that. So the weak will get together, and so it's basically a social contract. Glaucon is arguing for a social contract. His purpose is to protect the weak from the strong, and so on and so forth. The assumption, the human nature assumption, is that people fear domination more than they desire to dominate others. And so, that's probably true. Okay, so basically, if there's a war of all against all, you want to avoid chaos and a civil war. Locke will introduce the protection of property, and these ideas, social contract theory, then becomes the basis for the American and French revolutions. So why is our government legitimate? Why do people accept, let's say if you don't like Trump, why do you accept the fact that he's the president and go along with it and still cooperate as a citizen rather than getting terribly upset and starting a civil war?
Because we voted for him?
Yeah, so there's a certain procedure, and we accept the outcome of the procedure. So it's procedural. We accept the outcome of the procedure. The procedure is fair. When do we get really upset? When we think maybe the procedure is not fair. When we think, okay, the election is rigged. That's dangerous, because then if as soon as you lose faith in your system, then you're headed towards civil war. Okay. Has anyone heard the Gettysburg Address? You have. Yes? No?
Necessarily in
Yeah,
its
so-
entirety.
High school.
Okay. I think we need to listen. It's like one of the greatest things. It's really a tremendous illustration of the whole concept of government as a social contract.
The Civil War was fought in 10,000 places. At Big Bend, Big Sandy, and the Big Sunflower River. From Bunker Hill, West Virginia, and Blue Springs, Tennessee, and Cairo, Illinois, to Golgotha Church, Georgia, and Christiansburg, Kentucky. At at Citrus Point on the Cimarron River, and along Cowskin Bottom, at Pebbly Run and La Glorieta Pass, and Gettysburg.
I think if I had my choice of all the moments the president had in that war period, it would be at Gettysburg during Lincoln's delivery of his speech. Maybe to have seen him craft those beautiful words, those marvelous healing words, and then deliver them. They were for everyone for all time. They subsumed the entire world, all in it. It showed his compassion for everyone, his love for his people. That's what I'd like to be.
On November 19th, Lincoln traveled to Gettysburg to dedicate the new Union Cemetery. The featured speaker was Edward Everett of Massachusetts, a diplomat, clergyman, and celebrated orator. The president had been invited almost as an afterthought to offer a few appropriate remarks. Everett spoke for not quite 2 hours. Then Lincoln rose. The local photographer took his time focusing. Presumably, the president could be counted on to go on for a while. But he spoke just 269 words. He started off by reminding his audience that just 87 years had passed since the founding of the nation. And then he went on to embolden the Union cause with some of the most stirring words ever spoken. Lincoln was heading back to his seat before the photographer could open the shutter.
He felt that he had failed, that it was a poor speech, that the people didn't like it. It was so brief, less than 2 minutes. He felt that he had failed. Lehman, his friend Ward Lehman, was sitting next to him on the stand. When he sat down, there was just a sprinkling of applause. And he said, "Lehman, that speech won't scowl. That's what you say about a plow in the prairies when the mud doesn't come off it."
The cheek of every American must tingle with shame as he reads the silly, flat, fish-watery utterances of the man who has to be pointed out to intelligent foreigners as the President of the United States. Chicago Times.
Dear Mr. President, I should be glad if I could flatter myself that I came as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes. Edward Everett.
Fourscore and 7 years ago, our fathers brought forth upon this continent a new nation, conceived in liberty and dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal. Now we are engaged in a great civil war, testing whether that nation or any nation so conceived and so dedicated can long endure. We are met here on a great battlefield of that war. We have come to dedicate a portion of it as a final resting place for those who here gave their lives that their nation might live. It is altogether fitting and proper that we should do this. But in a larger sense, we cannot dedicate, we cannot consecrate, we cannot hallow this ground. The brave men, living and dead, who struggled here, have consecrated it far above our poor power to add or detract. The world will little note nor long remember what we say here, but can never forget what they did here. It is for us, the living, rather to be dedicated here to the unfinished work which they have thus far so nobly carried on. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they here gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, that this nation, under God, shall have a new birth of freedom, and the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
Of the people, by the people. So that's the criterion. The people form a contract and they create the government that they want. And then that's the legitimacy of the government. We've created this, we've agreed on this. In a sense, the government reflects the ethics of the community. And so that's why we're going to follow it. So, binding contract, though. Yeah, we already talked about this. It's similar to Glaucon in the sense that, both feel that people are naturally selfish and so on and so forth. They sort of need social control a little bit for their own good. So what kind of ethic can you produce? Rawls suggests, one thing you need to do is, have you ever heard the phrase, do not let the perfect be the enemy of the good? What do you think that means? Go.
Is it similar to like, don't, if it works, why fix it?
No. Have you ever met somebody whose goals were too lofty and they were pursuing something they were never going to be able to get? In the meantime, they were missing out on things that they could get?
So like, don't be a perfectionist.
Yeah, and especially if you're not, if it's not practical, if it's not going to happen. In other words, why concentrate on, I want, I'm not going to date anyone unless they're, a millionaire or they're 6'4", or, have X, Y, and Z car or whatever. And, in the meantime, you're turning down dates with people that you can actually, get along with. So one thing you want to do is be realistic. Now, what is a realistic nature of society? Is society naturally going to be egalitarian, everyone being exactly equal? Or is it nature and human nature for there to be differences and between people, and some people have a lot more than others, and some people have natural talents and drive and discipline and simply luck, and other people don't have that, right? So what is the natural outcome? And the natural outcome is going to be, inequality. So one thing you could do is say, well, what the communists said, we are going to get rid of inequality. We're going to force egalitarianism. And what they did is they said, let's get rid of all culture, all tradition is gone. We're going to eliminate it. It's now the year zero, and we are going to recreate. You're going to be a new socialist man, a new communist man and woman. And so they're going to basically ignore or suggest that human nature, really has no meaning, and we're just going to change stuff in society and everything's going to be okay. Whereas somebody like Rawls says, look, the reality is we're going to have differences between people. That's natural. That's actually even a good thing. On the other hand, those people who don't, are the least advantaged by social arrangements, those are the ones that we need to concentrate on in the sense of having a social ethic or fairness. So, you're willing to accept that some people need to be garbage men, other people need to be CEOs, some people need to be scientists, some people need to be models or teachers, and not everyone wants to get up at 6 in the morning and throw the garbage into the garbage truck in all sorts of weather, but somebody has to do it. So unless we think of a different way of doing this, that has to be part of the social arrangement. On the other hand, because that person doesn't have the job or the position or the rewards that other people have, your ethic really should concentrate on making that person's life as best as possible. The priority is the least amongst us. So, where is it? So in Christianity, Christ says, "Truly I say to you, as you did to one of the least of my brothers, that you did unto me." So the idea is you're looking at the ethic is going to be based on two things. Is it realistic? And the second thing is, does it does that arrangement, as much as possible, meet the needs and interests of the least in society? Right? Make sense? Okay, and so the idea here is especially with free markets, you're going to have competition and you're going to have inequality, which can be bad. It can be good because, of course, you want the people who are more talented and more dedicated and disciplined to get ahead, so they're motivated to do that. But at the same time, if you have certain people with, like Elon Musk money, running space programs, and then somebody else can't afford books for their kids, that causes social conflict, unrest, and unhappiness, right? So how do you? So you're not going to say, let's get rid of the free market and let's get rid of it, because it does a lot of good, but at the same time, we know it causes problems. So what should your ethic do? Your ethic should say, okay, who are the stakeholders? Who is the least amongst all of these stakeholders in this system? How do we agree on a social contract, on ethical guidelines that helps them the most? Right? Makes sense? So you're trying to be fair. You're trying to say there is inequality in the world. It's that's just the way it is. Let's not be in fantasy land here. Let's be practical and come up with a system that will really make people's lives better. You have a lot of problems. So I don't know if you know this, but this is what is this suggesting? Family wealth. What's happening with family wealth over time?
The rich are getting more of it.
The rich are getting more of it. So do you care? Does that affect you? Is that a problem for you? You don't care? The rich get richer, and what's your future like? Are you going to be in the top 10%, you think? How many people here are going to be in the top 10%? Okay, so why does this matter to you? What practical impact does it have on your life? What do you expect of your future now? If we're here or here, we're not going to see too much of the rewards of an economic system.
I feel like this is kind of just inherently a consequence of the idea that, well, first of all, generational wealth is a huge contributing factor to that, because that pretty much is, from what I understand, what causes the exponential growth in a lot of these cases. But it's kind of just a byproduct of the fact that some people are willing to do more and take advantage of more people to see this success. And then also just some of it is kind of luck in certain regards, where you invent something at the right time and it makes you stupidly wealthy.
Yeah, I haven't read a lot about this, but I agree to a certain extent. It's luck, and there's also some people have more resources than the others, so they have a competitive advantage.
Yeah,
On the other hand, what's that?
Still, in general, how do they get those resources? Is generally connected
Right.
to those yeah.
Right. Yeah. And so there's something called social capital, meaning that you're connected to people that have resources, or you actually have resources. Your family might have a factory or something like that. I forget what we started talking about.
Why the top 10%?
Oh, okay, yeah. So the future. I mean, this is does that seem fair? Does that seem ethical? Does it seem acceptable to you? Are you buying into a social contract which this is okay? See what I'm saying? Now, you could say yes, because I'm not, basically I might get a little bit of money. I mean, it looks like there's a little bit of rise here, and at least it's not going down too much. And that's fine. If you have talented people getting rich, we'll work here. You can have that attitude. But another chart here, it looks like something happened around the 70s and 80s. I think it's unions, things like that. They also trade with China. Starts about right about there. What does this tell you? To me, what we're talking about here is basically most people haven't had any improvement since the early 70s, whereas the wealthy have. Okay? And at a certain point, the people of the United States might say, we've had enough of this. We want to change the rules of the game. We want a new social contract. Okay, so how does Rawls do this? How do we come to an agreement? So everyone, like you are a student, right? So if we're going to negotiate a contract for this class, you're going to say, I don't want any homework. I want a guaranteed A. I don't want to have to come to class. I just want an A, and I want to make no effort at all. Right? Wouldn't that be your interest? Most students, I'll take that course. If you go to rate my professor, what's one of the things people are checking off? What are they at? How easy is the professor? That's critical. So I'm a professor, I'm going to say, no, you're not going to be learning anything. And then an administrator could say, hey, professor, you still got to give him a passing grade because we need his his butt in a seat paying tuition. And so now we have we have a conflict of interest between the different roles, right? Now, what would make you agree to the role of a student where the student is going to have to do what the professor says in order to get a fair grade? So you're going to have to work hard, and you're going to have to do things you don't want to do in order to get a grade. Why would you accept that when that's not in your ideal interests? And why would I if I'm confronted with students that don't want to learn, why would I accept a situation where I have to deal with students that don't want to be there and that are ignoring me and rolling their eyes and basically writing bad reviews and rate my professor? Okay. And why would the administrator want to deal with professors who are failing students because they're not up to standards, and that's undermining their tuition income? Okay, so what is going to lead us to accept your position? And the idea would be you have to discuss it as if you didn't know what your role was going to be. It's called I think it's veil of ignorance or something like that. Yeah, veil of ignorance. It's sort of just an intellectual move, or it's an idea, sort of an idea of how to discuss and come to a social agreement, ideally, in a sense. I'm not sure how incredibly practical this is, but Rawls, as well as many other theorists I could talk about, have the idea that if people have free and open and rational discussion, which is not undermined by self-interest, people like willing to give up what's rational and what's fair and what's good for the general interest, so people pursuing their self-interest undermines that conversation. So the idea, as much as possible, you want people not to have an axe to grind when they're engaging in this conversation. because they'll be more thinking about the general interest, what's better for everybody, rather than making sure they get their stuff in there. Right? Make sense? Okay, here's a nice quote. The natural distribution is neither just nor unjust, nor is it unjust that persons are born into society at some particular position. These are simply natural facts. What is just and unjust is the way that institutions deal with these facts. So it's not this utopian. There's another type of theory which is utopian. In other words, this is the way society should look. And if society doesn't look like that, then that's unethical. And so we have to, the only ethical thing is to change society until we're like this picture in our head. That's a utopian idea. Whereas Rawls is more realistic. Let's observe the way things really are. Let's look at what, reasonably must be accepted and dealt with. Let's look at stuff where we can reasonably, practically change it for the better. Sounds pretty reasonable to me. I don't know. Okay. Again, ancient ethics is how are you ethical in the ancient times? You are a better person. So you're going to tend to make better ethical decisions. Modern philosophies, we'll talk about Kant and utilitarianism next time, is going to be a procedure. Doesn't matter what your character is, as long as you're following the procedure, then that's most likely an ethical decision. It's sort of like the legal process. You're not claiming that the person is guilty or not, but they got a fair trial. So everything is legitimized, based on the procedure. Okay, all this stuff I said already. And okay, so these are basically some of the things that Rawls is talking about. He's saying, well, you have to be willing to enter into the contract. The contract ideally would be unanimous. You don't want people agreeing or involved in something that they actually don't want to be involved with, forcing them to be, like some people in the military want to volunteer in the military because they don't want somebody in the foxhole next to them that doesn't want to be there. So, and then basic conditions, in other words, can you do some sort of social contract, some sort of deliberation society-wide in terms of who do we want to be, what should their ethical rules be, and so on and so forth. Can you do that in communism or fascism or in a dictatorship? No. To a certain extent, the conversation itself needs to be free and open, and so that's a precondition for this ethic to happen. In order for people to talk about something and then come to an agreement about something, they've got to be able to talk about it. So, once again, it comes back to communication, deliberation. And you don't want what they call systematically distorted communication. You don't want certain people with, a disproportionate amount of money or influence or contacts, having more of a say outside of you. You want basically only the strongest argument to win. Everyone is on an equal level in terms of this discussion. And forget about any other inequalities outside of that. The discussion is sacred in a sense. Then, in terms of a particular quality that you want, in order, you know that society is unfair. You've heard this before, right? Life is unfair. So he's accepting that. But what he's saying is that, but that doesn't mean we can't make it as good as possible. It's still worth making an effort. There's still a lot we could do that's good to configure society so that the people who don't, didn't end up in the most advantageous position, we're gonna consider their interests first, and that's that actually produces more fairness. Okay, so life is unfair. We're going to make it a little bit more fair by having a strong ethic, considering the interests of the weakest. Good? Okay. So what's an example? Let's say students entering a course. How would this work? How would a Rawlsian social contract work? Any ideas?
So kind of following the 5 conjectures you have here, entering into a contract, that would be like we registered to take the class, agreeing unanimously to the contract is that we show up to the class. Including basic conditions of the contract would be we have the ability to contact you and tell you like, hey, I don't necessarily like certain things that, you know, are happening in the class. Like I have the opinion to voice that I might have an issue with something without you going, okay, get out of my class, necessarily. Maximizing the welfare of the most disadvantaged. We have IEPs and 504 plan for people with disabilities who need stuff like that. Ensuring the stability of the contract would be things like the school sends out like surveys and stuff to kind of gauge feedback and whatnot.
Okay. Any ideas? No, nothing. You've never had a course where you negotiated the syllabus at all?
Yeah, it's like when you want to retake a test, then like you need
Yeah.
fair rules for on both sides. So like, as a student, I have a set of rules that are fair for us, and that we follow. And then, like Hushi said, we have the expression to like just how we feel. Like, oh, can we hand it in a little late, the homework assignment?
Yeah, so you could be, like in the middle of the semester, you could be renegotiating. You could say, Professor, we all agree that we didn't have enough time to study for X, Y, and Z last time, so can we have a little bit more time? And then, so you're renegotiating the contract.
Yeah.
So the syllabus is part of the contract. Also, you're part of a general academic culture. So when you first start as a student, you're looking at role models and you're just following the behavior of everyone else. That's part of the contract as well. You're buying into accepting, you know, you're learning that role, you're accepting that role. So you're buying into that overall, you know, contract. Now, what's the sign that this is breaking down? The social contract in a classroom is breaking down. What would that look like?
Nobody's showing up.
Oh yeah, I mean it'd be, you know, basically if people are not happy with the way things are going, the rules and you know, regulations and habits and procedures and you know and beliefs and things like that, you know, that's so their motivation is certainly not going to be there. You know, students have to. Most of the learning, you know, students usually blame the professor, but most of the learning, you know, professors can't make you learn. You have to study yourself, you have to care, you have to want to learn. There's no two ways about it. So, you know, and how could that be repaired? So you know, let's say the professor maybe doesn't care about what the students think and just imposes stuff, or the professor's great, and the students have just decided that they're going to, you know, do the least to get the highest grade, but basically their job is not to learn, it's just to do as little as possible. Okay, so there could be a lot of dysfunctional social arrangements that undermine a class, right? So what solutions, what could repair that?
Having discussions with each
Yeah.
other, see how we can make it better.
Okay, let's hear everyone. Everyone gets to speak. There's no retribution. If you say the problem is you're a terrible teacher, you know, that's fine. I can't get angry or do anything about that, or you know, I have to let you talk, and you have to feel comfortable doing that and secure doing that, and so on and so forth. And if you don't have that conversation, if you can't express yourself, why would you ever cooperate? So you would never buy in unless you had your say, right? So in part, what you want is everyone to have their say, and then eventually you're going to come to an agreement. You're going to have to compromise. You're not going to get what you want, and the other people are not going to get what they want. But you're looking for fairness in a sense. You're looking for, okay, it's worse if we have no cooperation, so I want cooperation. I am going to have to make compromises. I'm willing to make compromises for that cooperation.